All right, so we have h of x. It's all, multiplied out and everything, and it's asking questions about domain, whole, zero, vertical asymptotes, horizontal asymptotes, y-intercept. So what we need to do is we need to view this in its factored form along with its regular standard form. So the factored form is going to be that is difference of squares, x plus 3, x minus 3. The denominator is two numbers that add up to -2, would multiply out to -3. So x minus 3, x plus 1. Now we see what's going to happen here. We see that we have an x minus 3 and an x minus 3. We'll deal with that when we have to, but not quite yet. The domain is any number that takes the denominator and makes it equal 0. Now the two denominators, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at each factor and I'm going to look at every number that makes it 0. My magic number for you is -3. My magic number for you is regular 3. My magic number for you is regular 3. My magic number for you is -1. Now, the domain is any number that makes the denominator equal to 0, and the numbers that do that are going to be 3 and -1. And if you're thinking, well, what about these? Aren't these going to cross out? Yeah, kind of, but the original problem looks like this now. And so we have to take into consideration the original problem before we cross anything out. So I'm not allowed to plug in -1, and I'm not allowed to plug in 3. So the domain is going to be everything up until -1, -1 to 3, union, and 3 on to infinity. That's my domain. My wholes are going to be any number whose factor is seen both in the numerator and in the denominator the same amount of times. X minus 3 appears in the denominator, x minus 3 appears in the numerator, which makes 3 a whole. So x equals 3 is a whole. My zeros are any number in the numerator that equals 0 that is not a whole. So 3 is not a whole because I'm not allowed to plug in 3 in the first place. I'm sorry, 3 is not a 0. 3 is a whole. 3 is not a 0 because I'm not allowed to plug in 3 in the first place. So 0 is -3, and that is it. My vertical asymptotes are any number that is seen in the denominator that is also not a whole. -1 is the only vertical asymptote, and since -1 is a vertical asymptote, we write out x equals -1. The horizontal asymptote is where everything levels out. Okay, in other words, my end behavior. You find your end behavior by taking the leading term divided by the leading term and plugging in infinity. X squared over x squared equals 1. Plugging in infinity into 1 changes nothing. So my horizontal asymptote is the horizontal line y equals +1 because everything levels out at +1. My y-intercept is what happens when x is equal to 0. Well, when x is equal to 0, you go away, you go away, you go away, and you're left with just the constant divided by the constant. So -9 divided by -3 is +3. So there you have it. You're given a regular old rational function, domain, wholes, zeros, vertical asymptotes, horizontal asymptotes, y-intercept. Hope this helps.